You could make a case that it's harder to succeed in the NBA than just about anywhere in the world. You have to compete against the 300 best players on earth and probably the 300 most competitive and aggressive players too. Needless to say, that environment doesn't work for everyone. Some players flourish while others fail. Sometimes they fail big, so big that it earns them a place in basketball history, even if it isn't the place they wanted. Today, we have a special treat for you on NBA Central. We're bringing you the top 5 worst NBA players of all time, ranked in order and backed up by evidence. Keep watching to find out once and for all who the worst of the worst really are. Number 5, Manute Bol. Many people are surprised to hear Manute Bol's name come up in conversations about the worst NBA players of all time. Bol is one of the only 2 players in NBA history to stand at 7 feet 7 inches tall, the other being the lesser known Georges Marasan. This seems to make people just assume he must have been really good because he towered over all of his opponents. But if watching Taco Fall has been a recent indication, just because you're giant doesn't mean you can play in the NBA. At least, not well, that is. Bol grew up in what is now South Sudan. Bol's father was a Dinka tribal elder. The Dinka people are native to South Sudan, and studies have shown that, on average, they are the tallest people on earth. Bol says his father was 6'8". Amazingly, he says his mother was even taller, standing 6'10". If true, this would have made her one of the tallest WNBA players in history had she been a player. But Bol's most mind-blowing claim was about his grandfather, who he said was no less than 7 feet 10 inches tall. Coming from anybody else, this would sound like total BS. But coming from Manute Bol, it honestly sounds possible. Bol grew up in a small village with no way to measure himself. He had no idea how tall he was until he traveled to Cleveland and started playing in college. It also turned out that he had no idea when his birthday was or how old he was. The basketball coach at Cleveland State University decided to simply write October 16, 1962 on Bol's paperwork. The date stuck, but it is believed that Bol was actually much older. Because Bol was so freakishly enormous, he basically had a first-class ticket to the NBA, but it can be easily argued that it was a mistake to give it to him. It's understandable that teams wanted Bol on their roster and figured they could train him to use his size for things like rebounding and shot blocking, but Bol simply had no basketball skills. In fact, although he isn't the number 1 worst player ever, he is quite possibly the least skilled. Most people don't realize that Manute Bol actually coined the phrase, "my bad." He used this phrase quite a lot during his short NBA career, and he was constantly missing shots, fumbling the ball, and making fundamental mistakes on both ends of the court. The one thing Bol was pretty good at was blocking shots. This might be his only redeemable quality as a player. In addition to being insanely tall, Bol also had insanely long limbs. His wingspan was 8 feet 6 inches, the widest in NBA history. That's 9 inches wider than Rudy Gobert. So even with absolutely no athletic skills, Bol was able to block shots at an incredible rate. During one season, he averaged 5 blocks per game, which, in case you're not sure, is super freaking high. Had it not been for his unique blocking ability, Manute Bol would surely have been the worst NBA player of all time. But he managed to play out a fairly long and interesting career, playing for several teams and becoming something of a celebrity in the process. Everyone wanted to see Bol play, not because his play was any good, but because, well, wouldn't you want to see this guy? Bol retired in 1998 because of growing health problems. Sadly, he passed away in 2010. For his funeral, a customized casket was built that was 8 feet long. Number 4, Bryant Reeves. Back when the Grizzlies first became a franchise in 1995, they were originally based in Vancouver, Canada. For the first draft in the team's history, they were given the 6th pick in the first round. With their first ever pick, the Grizzlies selected Bryant Reeves, which turned out to be one of the worst decisions ever. Reeves was a 7-footer from Oklahoma. He had played well in college, averaging over 20 points a game and leading his team all the way to the Final Four. But as we all know, it's much harder to succeed in the NBA than in college. It's also hard to succeed in the NBA if you're fat, slow, and have no skills. Reeves' career actually started out pretty well. Unlike anybody else on this list, he managed to average double figures when it came to points. In fact, he even scored a career-high 41 points against the Boston Celtics. But the problem with Reeves was that he just wasn't athletic at all. Sure, he was super tall, but that's not enough. He continued to gain weight, and eventually, Reeves was so heavy, he started having back problems. His stats quickly spiraled into the gutter. He became so out of shape and in so much discomfort that he really couldn't play at all. Bryant Reeves finished his NBA career after just 6 years by being carried off the court in a stretcher, which had to be carried by no less than 8 people. Reeves is not the worst NBA player of all time, but he probably had the worst career. In less than a decade, he went from being a top 10 draft pick to being too fat and useless to do anything except lie down on the sidelines. For that, He earned a special place in the halls of basketball suckage. But if you think the Grizzlies were disappointed with their first round draft pick, you better hold on to your seat before we look at this next one. Darko Milicic. Darko Milicic is among the worst NBA players of all time, and as far as disappointing draft picks go, he's the undisputed champion. The tragically confused Detroit Pistons picked Milicic second overall in 2003, right after LeBron James. This insane mistake meant that Milicic went ahead of Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, Kendrick Perkins, Leandro Barbosa, Kyle Korver, Zaza Pachulia, and dozens of other players who turned out to be infinitely better. One of the great mysteries with Darko Milicic is why he was ever drafted in the first place. Believe it or not, he was even younger than LeBron. Milicic turned 18 just days before the draft, making him the fourth youngest NBA player in history. Similar to Luka Doncic, Milicic got to start playing in the EuroLeague as a teenager. This must have convinced the Pistons that he was a young talent who could blossom into an NBA star. But holy moly, were they wrong. Milicic never got much playing time, was traded multiple times, and ended up retiring in 2012. His career scoring average was just 6 points. For such a high draft pick, Darko Milicic ended up with a supremely disappointing stat sheet, but it wasn't the worst stat sheet ever. The honor belongs to this next player. Number 2, Sun Yu. Most people have never even heard of Sun Yu. That's because Sun Yu was so bad, he was ironically not even given enough time to cement a legacy as one of the worst players. But he definitely was. During the very brief period he was in the NBA, Sun Yu racked up what is the most likely worst stat sheet in the NBA. Yu got to start playing professional basketball in China. In 2007, he declared for the NBA draft and was selected by the Lakers in the second round. Instantly, the team regretted it. Yu played in just 10 games. In those 10 games, Yu caused more turnovers than assists or steals. Also, astonishingly, Yu somehow committed more fouls than points scored. For some extraordinary reason, Yu was allowed to sit on the bench for a couple more years, and he actually got a championship ring when the Lakers won in 2009. Yu was booted out of the NBA that same year. But if you think Sun Yu winning an NBA championship is weird, just wait till you see the number 1 worst player of all time. Number 1, Brian Scalabrine. Brian Scalabrine is the absolute worst NBA player of all time. He almost became something of a meme, even before memes were as mainstream as they are today. As we dive into his career and backstory, you'll start to understand why. Scalabrine is another good example of how much harder it is to succeed in the NBA than in college. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, Scalabrine played for the USC Trojans. This is a huge school that competes in the Pac-12. Believe it or not, Scalabrine was the team's leading scorer. He was also the team's leading rebounder and leader in field goal percentage. Back then, it was no joke. Scalabrine really was the star of the team. In his senior year, he led USC all the way to the Elite 8. They were eventually eliminated by Duke, who went on to win the NCAA championship. This was a really good start to Scalabrine's basketball career. That same year, he declared for the NBA draft and was selected by the New Jersey Nets in the second round. Scalabrine was riding high. But then, just as he was getting ready for his NBA debut, he was hit by a series of injuries, both during workouts and preseason games. Scalabrine didn't actually make his official NBA debut until the following year in 2002. The man struggled to create any decent stats at all. He averaged a dismal 2.1 points. His rebound and assist numbers were even lamer than that. Part of this might have been because around that time, the Nets were really good. People forget this, but they actually made it all the way to the NBA Finals in 2002. Scalabrine was definitely a bench player and didn't see many minutes, especially during crunch time in the playoffs. However, during those rare moments when Scalabrine did end up on the court, he was even less productive than during the regular season, averaging less than 2 points per game and less than even one single rebound or assist. This launched what many think is Scalabrine's signature brand. He was a very noticeable player who was playing really badly, but on a really good team. Going all the way to the NBA Finals in your first season is like hitting the jackpot. While the Nets got swept by the Lakers, it was enough to make people notice there was something kind of funny about the situation. Scalabrine was like the guy who plays a triangle in a famous rock band. This became a pattern in his career. In 2005, after showing only minimal improvement, he was traded to the Boston Celtics. He signed a 5-year, $15 million contract, which doesn't make sense, honestly. What did Boston see in him? Did they still think maybe he just hadn't found the right fit? If you do well enough in college, sometimes it takes a while to convince everybody that you don't have what it takes to play in the NBA. That's especially true if you keep finding yourself on winning teams, which is exactly what Scalabrine managed to do for the second time in a row. The Celtics finished third in the Eastern Conference the same year he arrived. He had absolutely nothing at all to do with it, but he was on the team, technically. Just like he did in New Jersey, Scalabrine sort of stuck out in Boston. He was distinctive looking and instantly recognizable, and he was also mysteriously awful even as his team was winning and winning and winning. And the Celtics only continued to improve. In 2007, they signed Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen, forming a legendary Big Three, which didn't include Scalabrine, of course. The Celtics were as hyped as they have ever been that year. They finished with the best record in the NBA, and they beat Kobe and the Lakers in the NBA Finals for their only championship in the 21st century. Scalabrine was there for all of this. He wore his jersey in the arena. He wore a headband and cheered when other people scored. Confetti rained down on him along with the rest of his teammates, and most amazingly, he got to put on his very own championship ring. For a little while, Scalabrine's luck continued even after Boston. He next signed with the Chicago Bulls during the peak of Derrick Rose's career. In Chicago, Scalabrine earned the nickname the White Mamba, which was obviously sarcastic because the White Mamba only averaged 1 point and half a rebound. But like always, it didn't matter. Scalabrine rode the bench all the way to the 2011 Eastern Conference Finals, where he once again got to warm up along with the team, wear his jersey, and celebrate whenever they won. For a brief period, it looked like Scalabrine might be on his way to a second NBA championship, but the Bulls eventually lost to LeBron James and his ultra-stacked Miami Heat. Scalabrine retired from basketball in 2012. He left behind a unique legacy. No player has ever been as consistently unproductive. No player has ever won so much, including a championship ring, while doing so little. If he hadn't been so lucky with teams, it would have actually mattered that Scalabrine never scored any points, never got any rebounds, and never even managed to pass the ball to anybody else in a helpful way. But for basically his entire career, Scalabrine's teammates didn't need him. This created a totally unique situation where he was able to have a long and decorated NBA career. But in theory, anybody could have done what he did. He was just the lucky 1 in a million who got to do it. That is what makes Brian Scalabrine the worst NBA player of all time. If you like this video, be sure to check out our other videos, like NBA Ugliest Shooting Forms, the hottest girlfriends of NBA players, and best NBA fights and ejections of all time. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you don't miss any great content like this. Catch you in the next video.